Well, good morning and welcome to Elevenses once again. It's Sunday the 11th of October and you're watching a recorded show this morning because I am out running a bike course at this moment. So what have we got in the show? With no further ado, let's look at the contents. Well, we've got some good news for Norton buyers. Zontes have brought out a new 125 which is aimed at design innovation and quality benchmark. Bike sales continue their partial recovery from the lockdown. Kawasaki have put their supercharged H2R engine into a helicopter. And for today's better biking tip, I'll be looking at staying warm on two wheels, which is pretty topical seeing as we're well on into autumn now. So make a brew, grab your biscuit, pull up a chair and settle down for the next 20 minutes or so of Elevenses. Right, okay, so let's start with the Norton story. Well, some good news is filtering through from the very messy collapse of Norton motorcycles. You'll recall that the administrators put the company up for sale early this year, and it was purchased back in the spring by the Chennai-based two-wheeler giant TVS. This Indian bike manufacturer paid $16 million for the intellectual property, the equipment and stock. Now, at the time, a statement said that Norton would continue to run out of the UK facility at Donington Hall initially, but the business would then move to a new design and manufacturing facility within 6 months. Now, what that's allowed is for the property, which is owned by Stuart Garner, the former boss of Norton, to be put up for sale by the administrators, BDO, and that was back in July. Now, the portfolio of buildings actually includes the Donington Hall site itself, which is where the offices and the manufacturing facilities were, but it also includes the Priest House Hotel, which is being run by Legacy Hotels since Norton itself went into administration, and Hastings House, the Lansdowne buildings and the Kings Mill Caravan Park, and they're all set in some 80 odd acres of ground. The guide price for this entire portfolio of buildings and land has been set at just over 13 million. Now, a recent statement of affairs has been published, and the estimated figures suggest, and this is really good news, that there will be enough money to pay back all of Norton's creditors. As part of the deal, TVS themselves had actually said that they would honour previously paid deposits and machines that had already been bought outright but not delivered. And so the customers of the old company have now received letters from BDO asking if they still want to receive the bikes. So in order to do that, all customers have to do is agree to transfer the deposits over to the new business. They don't have to do that. But if they do want to be reimbursed, they will have to join the long list of creditors, which is waiting for the payout from the administrators, BDO. But as I say, the money should be there. A statement from TVS, the company that actually owns Norton, said, "We appreciate the great importance of this need to look after customers who place deposits on orders that are unyet fulfilled, despite there being no legal obligation to do so. In this initial phase of Norton's rebuilding, with the powerful backing and support of TVS, the most important ongoing commitment we face is to address all open orders. We're doing our utmost to ensure all our valued customers involved can reach a positive outcome as we work to satisfy everyone, providing any balance outstanding after the deposit is taken into account is paid by the customer." Okay, so that's people who've ordered bikes, but what about the situation for some owners who had actually placed bikes back into Norton's hands for warranty work? Well, there's at least one case where the bike has been partly stripped, presumably to provide parts for other bikes, and it seems that as part of the goodwill approach that TVS have taken, those claims will all be respected. So there's still a way to go, but it does seem that the mess that Norton had descended into is slowly being cleared up, which is great news for anybody interested in the company. Right, okay, right at the other end of the spectrum, away from the £44,000 Norton V4, is the Chinese Zontes brand. And they have recently introduced a totally new range of clean sheet designs for their 125s. Now, in the past, Chinese motorcycles have had something of a reputation for being a bit iffy, partly because they were based on decades-old Japanese motors, which were either being built under license or possibly based on dubiously legal near clones of those motors. And the sort of quality control wasn't too hot. Things rusted, things like fork seals failed, shock absorbers leaked, electrics weren't too clever, and the design was also a bit gas pipe heavy. The chassis, I remember some of the Suzukis that we used, they were reliable enough, but boy, were they heavy for a 125. But the movement of the Chinese motorcycle industry generally into the mainstream is continuing apace, and it's being driven, I suspect, by at least two things: that possibly the need for cleaner powered two-wheelers in China itself, which has seen some big push to clean up the air quality over there, but also the potential for China to move fairly decisively into the budget motorcycle market. Now, if you remember, think back a few decades, back to the 1960s really, and into the early part of the 1970s, I suppose. The budget end of the market was how the Japanese manufacturers made their initial movement into the British and American markets, when they actually started to displace these machines that we'd sort of lived with for years and years. Now the sort of boot is on the other foot to some extent. Japanese motorcycles are mainstream over here, but they've also gone up in price, and so there's a way in for the Chinese motorcycles to come in with a quality machine, but at a more affordable price point. Now, Zontes themselves have actually been established in the UK market for over 10 years, but it's fair to say that they've never really hit the consciousness of bikers up until now. They have, to be perfectly blunt, focused entirely on the cheap and fairly cheerful end of transport. But what they now are aiming to do is, to quote their press release, provide a benchmark for Chinese manufacturers in terms of design, innovation and quality. So their all-new 3-model range of 125s includes a naked sports bike, a sort of modern street scrambler style machine, and a sports adventurer. So let's have a look at one of their bikes. This is the ZT125U1, which is the street scrambler version, and Zontes describe it as funky, fun and versatile, and a bike for all occasions and every day. Well, it certainly, I think, looks the part. It certainly has some fairly striking looks. It's a bit sort of praying mantis looking for me, but it's certainly right up there with any other motorcycle that's been built in the last few years in terms of styling. So what's it equipped with? Well, the new generation Zontes 125 motor is a water-cooled single with an aluminium cylinder, and it produces 10.8 kilowatts or 14.5 horsepower at 9,000 RPM. And that's pretty much bang on the limit for a 125. The similar sort of power output bike I've ridden was the old Varadero Honda, and that was capable of sort of just about topping 70, maybe even reaching 75 in favourable conditions. So, if the claimed power output is accurate, then the Zontes should be one of the quicker 125s out there. Certainly a lot quicker than some of the older ones, which were struggling to put out 10 horsepower and really didn't make much above 50 miles an hour. So that's a big step forward for these machines. What does it come with in terms of widgets? Well, it gets Bosch ABS standard as a safety feature, and it also gets Bosch EFI, which interestingly has switchable mapping between a sport and an eco mode. Although just how useful an eco mode will be on a 125 is a moot point. Anyway, but the idea is that this new model will be a watershed in changing the buyer's public perception of Chinese manufacturers. So to that end, it comes with keyless security. a lightweight aluminium swing arm with the monoshock rear end. It gets upside down forks. The exhaust is stainless, which is a big plus. Crash bars and bungs are standard, as are lightweight aluminium rims with stainless spokes. And although I can't confirm this, looking at the pictures, it does look like the spokes themselves are mounted to the sides of the rim, and that suggests to me that the tyres will be tubeless, which will be a big step forward for a spoked tyre. I don't think, did I say the spokes are stainless as well? The entire bike comes with 2 years manufacturer's warranty, and the price, a very competitive 2,999.99p, which is definitely a very good price indeed. Okay, so don't forget, Survival Skills here is still offering practical training courses. You can take advantage of my weather guarantee. Now, I can't make the sun shine, but what I can do is guarantee that if the weather turns foul on the day of the course, we can postpone to a better day at no expense to you. The training, if we do training in poor weather conditions, quite honestly, the whole thing becomes an exercise in staying upright, and it really isn't a good learning experience. Somebody said it's character building, but it isn't actually. It's just it becomes a chore. So I want your course to be enjoyable as well as educational. So don't worry about the weather if you're looking to book a course. Even though we're heading deeper into October, I am still running practical training courses, and the weather guarantee will ensure you do get a good day. Okay, so on with the news. Bike sales. The latest bike sales have been released from the MCIA, and what it shows is that the numbers continue to show a partial recovery from lockdown. Not surprisingly, scooter sales are on the up from the same time last year, despite the shutdown, and both 50cc's and 125cc bikes generally are showing a significant increase on year sales, which suggests it's a lot of people using them for commuting. Bigger machines, sales generally still down on last year, and perhaps not surprisingly, the classification that's taken the biggest hit are tourers, which are down 27% on this time last year. Not surprisingly, the usual top sellers are the BMW 1250 GS, Honda's perennial CB125S and PCX 125s, but they're joined by a slightly perhaps surprising machine, and that's the Royal Enfield Interceptor 650. Although I have to say that having seen quite a few of these on the road, maybe I shouldn't be quite as surprised as I was. And this is an unmanned helicopter called the K-Racer. The interesting thing about this is that it's powered by the supercharged H2R motorcycle engine. Kawasaki have successfully test flown this unmanned helicopter. It's what's known as a compound machine, because it has not only the conventional 4-blade rotor on the top, but as you can see, it's also fitted with wings and propellers on both the left and right sides. Now, the propellers do two things. They give the machine forward thrust, but they also allow the torque generated by the main rotor to be cancelled out, so that it doesn't need tail rotor like a standard helicopter. In forward flight, the wings also create lift, which reduces the burden on the main rotor, and enables the machine to reach a higher speed in conventional flight than helicopters can. The aim is to use this development machine to further their development of vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, which will include manned and unmanned helicopters. And as I say, the most unusual feature there is the power source for a helicopter. Right, okay, on to our final item, and that's all about staying warm this winter. That is the first of a two-parter. Next week I'll be looking at heated grips and gloves, but today it's just basically some information about staying warm. Now, here in the UK, we're obviously moving into the season My morning temperatures have actually dipped quite significantly. I was quite chilly out on for a few minutes the other day when I left to meet the trainee. But since many of us are actually riding to work thanks to the pandemic, when previously we might have been using public transport, some of us will possibly be experiencing riding in colder weather for the first time, and some new riders it will be a completely new experience to just how cold we can get on a motorcycle. Now the obvious answer is to stick more clothing on, and whether we do that by buying winter jackets and trousers or by layering up underneath them or by both, the object of that particular exercise is to increase the thermal insulation. A bit like sticking more insulation in your loft, in fact. But what we have to remember is that the insulation cannot totally stop heat loss. It only stops heat loss up to the point at which the temperature gradient is low enough to be met by the body's own heat. So when the temperature gradient from the outside to the inside is relatively low, our body produces heat, and that heat loss is balances what goes out through the clothing into the environment around us, and so we stay warm. But if the temperature drops only a little, then that clothing may well be enough to keep us warm, may be all we need. But as soon as the temperatures start to drop a bit more significantly, then it cannot prevent that heat loss, and we start to cool down. Now, the better the thermal insulation, the slower the rate of heat loss. So if we only ride a short distance, maybe work is 30 minutes away or something, then that clothing may be good enough to get us to work without us getting so cold that we actually really notice we're getting chilly. But take that same clothing and take the same outside air temperature, but take a longer ride, and now you're exposed to the chilling effect of the cold for longer, and with longer to lose heat through the clothing, we will start to chill internally. So in some ways, adding insulating clothing, all it does is it delays the onset of chilling. It prolongs the agony, if you like. We think of it as retaining heat, but we have to remember that it only ever slows down the rate of heat loss once it gets cold outside. Now, that's a much more serious problem if you're habitually a long distance rider. But if you're just a short distance rider, it really comes as a bit of a shock. Now, it took me years to understand why the clothing that kept me warm when I was doing short runs back and forth to college, when I took a long trip out, suddenly I got freezing cold, and I didn't actually understand why. And it's this exposure over a longer period. Now, what happens if the weather gets even colder? Well, basically, then the rate of the heat loss across the clothing increases, and so we get colder more quickly. In freezing temperatures, the clothing that felt warm enough for us to survive that half-hour ride to work or whatever, now we get cold. We get seriously cold in minutes inside that clothing. Now, what happens as we get cold? Well, circulation to the body's periphery is cut off, so basically the blood is shut off flowing down to the skin, and it slows down. It gets cut off flowing down the arms to the fingers, and the same happens with the legs. So eventually fingers and toes all sort of start to go numb, and even the sort of hand muscles start to go stiff. Now, if we're out in the cold long enough, then even the blood going to the brain gets chilled, and then our brain function goes too, and we start to lose concentration and focus. So what's the solution? Well, we could keep trying to add more insulation, just like you would in the loft. You can pile insulation on insulation on insulation until you've got the stuff, sort of meter deep. And that's the idea behind layering, where we put on more than one layer of clothing. But after a bit, the problem is that it just gets too thick to be practical. And we don't simply end up looking like the Michelin Man, we end up feeling like the Michelin Man too. I've always found that those really thick winter gloves, but when you start putting inner layers and things inside those, it all gets really too clunky to use. It might be all right on a long ride where you're going down the motorway and you're never using the clutch and the brake, but as soon as you're in town, it all just gets far too bulky around the fingers to actually use effectively. And when you've got heavy clothing on as well, just simple body movements start to become complicated because you've got so much kit on. And just try looking over your shoulder as well when you've got, big collars around your neck. So what's the solution? Well, I have to admit it's heated clothing. Now, I will be honest and I will tell you I was skeptical about how good heated clothing could be until I actually bought some. Now, how does it work? Well, the idea is that now, rather than just relying on the body to heat itself, you're adding heat to the body. You're topping up the body's own production of heat. And what that means is we can significantly reduce the temperature outside of us that we can ride at until we start to chill. In my experience, I've ridden through seriously cold weather as an all-weather courier and instructor, and I've ridden bikes for hours in cold weather, sometimes up to 12 or more hours a day. And as soon as I got the heated clothing, I found that I could ditch an awful lot of my winter weather wear. And for instructing, for example, even now, all I wear in the winter is an unlined riding suit with a heated waistcoat underneath. We say chilly weather, maybe 10 degrees, we're getting down towards 10 now, down to about 5, then all I need is a long sleeve shirt, my heated waistcoat and a light fleece, and the fleece, the heated waistcoat is over the top of all that. If it gets seriously cold, say down 5 to about freezing point, then all I do is I reverse the layers and I wear the fleece over the top of the waistcoat. So now some of the heat is actually trapped a bit closer to the body. The jacket feels hotter, but it also stops the heating air from the jacket actually escaping quite so easily. And if it's even colder, I was also a blood runner for a number of years, and I recall one job particularly when I got called out on a January night. I got called out just after midnight. It was already minus 10 Celsius by then. I had an indoor-outdoor thermometer, so I knew exactly how cold it was. And I was out on a 3-hour ride to pick up and deliver the blood product. Now, I would really, really have struggled without the heated clothing. I put an extra t-shirt on, then the heated waistcoat, then the long sleeve shirt over that, then the fleece, then the riding kit, and over the top of all that I put a pair of unlined waterproofs as a sort of wind stopping layer. So it wasn't too bulky, but it actually was very effective as thermal insulation over the heated jacket. And I survived that 3-hour ride. I got back, I was cold, but I wasn't incapacitated. Okay, so how much does all this cost? Well, heated waistcoats are available for under £100. You can pay more. But they last. It may seem a big investment, but they seriously last. My first Gerbing waistcoat, which I bought back in 1995, just about the time I was finishing couriering and becoming a bike instructor, cost me I think about £80 at the time, but it lasted 10 years before the wiring failed. And it was that particular waistcoat that opened my eyes to how the heated clothing really changed the way I looked at riding in cold weather. The replacement I have from XO2, I have a heated kidney belt. So now that is about 15 years old and that's still going fine. I've also got a heated waistcoat from XO2, which I haven't used a great deal, to be honest, recently, but they're both still going fine. How much current draw? That's something that worries a lot of people. Well, frankly, only the oldest bikes are likely to have a problem, or possibly some of the 125s with low-powered electrics. You will need 12-volt supply. But as long as you can power a halogen headlight, you should be able to power a heated waistcoat. They draw about 30 watts, which is about half the pull from a headlight bulb. You can get heated jackets where the element is built into the riding jacket, but frankly I would avoid those, not because they don't work, but because if the jacket starts to leak, which most waterproofs do after a couple of years, or you damage it and maybe a low speed crash, you could rip the fabric, or the heating element fails, conversely, then the whole jacket is scrap in the purpose for which you built it. So, okay, next week I'll look at heated, keeping your fingers warm with, and how heated waistcoats can do that as well, and the pros and cons of gloves and grips. So tune in next week to find that. Don't forget the show's on at 11 on Sundays and Wednesdays. And if you can't catch it live, you can also find it here on Facebook later in the day. And it will also go up on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and also on Instagram. You'll find the links. Okay, so last but not least, don't forget, we are heading deeper into autumn, so if you want to learn and don't want to get cold, which is what we've just been talking about, why not look into my online coaching sessions? These basically offer the same client-based training that Survival Skills is already well known for, but I take it online. Tell me what you want to know about and I'll set up a session for you. These sessions can be pretty much any time, weekdays, weekends, time to suit you. They're educational, they're convenient, and above all else, they are warm. So, okay, stay safe out there, ride well, and I'll be back with the next show on Wednesday. Thanks for watching. You are watching Kevin Williams and Survival Skills with Elevenses. See you again soon.